Welcome, everyone. My name is Ryan Smith. This is ModX Network Voices, where we feature experts in the industry and talk about deep dive topics related to offsite and modular construction. As usual, I'm joined by my partner, Ivan Rupnik. Ivan?
Hi, Ryan. Hi, everybody.
Thanks for coming again. And our guest today is Craig Mitchell. Craig was with Metric Modular for a number of years, has quite a bit of experience in the industry, and is here to talk about some of the gaps in knowledge in the modular industry that he sees, recently having stepped away from Metric. And Craig, we just welcome you and thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Ivan. Happy to be here. And it's been an interesting period of time. Of course, we're doing this during COVID, and as you can see, everyone is going online now. But I think we've adapted fairly well. So, just a quick background on myself. I've spent the last 10 years, almost a decade here in the permanent modular construction world, and really focusing on, a number of sectors: hospitality and multifamily, and, post-secondary education has been a lot of my focus, along with high performance buildings as well. With Metric, we really positioned ourselves as leaders in the green building side of the equation, and into high performance buildings such as passive house and other types of net zero type structures. So it's been quite a growth over the last 10 years, knowledge-wise for myself. And I also retained a board position with the Modular Building Institute for the last 3 years, as well as another board position here in Vancouver, where I'm based out of, and the Vancouver Regional Construction Association. So it's been an interesting career over the last decade or so as modulars gain popularity. So.
Oh, that's really wonderful to hear. Ivan's going to start off with just some questions, and we'll just unpack this as a conversation and try to tap into your wealth of experience, Craig. And really, again, thank you for joining.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And thanks for continuing to allow us to dig deeper and deeper into modular. So we've had a chance to speak a number of times. And I know we share a tough love for the modular industry. So Ryan and I get to look at it from the outside, and you've been in it for a good bit of time. But one of the things that we've kind of stumbled upon, and I think we all share as an issue, is kind of some of the gaps in the modular skill set. And one of the sources of those gaps has to do with the reality, whether we want to admit to it or not, is that the modular industry is still very much informed by some of the practices of manufactured housing, and to some degree was focused until fairly recently in single family. And so the shift to multifamily, to commercial, but also to again, what you brought up, which is very interesting, to high performance buildings, to in terms of energy performance, those seem like obvious places for modular to go. And yet there still seems to be a whole series of gaps that prevent us from really realizing that, or prevent the industry from realizing that potential. So maybe if you could identify, again, in your experience, what were some of the what are some of the gaps that have, as the variety of opportunities for modular has expanded, that may have kept the industry from fully taking advantage of them? And what can we do about them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I think you touched on a really good point. A lot of times what I've seen in the last decade or so with the increase in popularity of modular is that, a lot of modular, residential modular companies building single family homes have now moved into the commercial modular space. And it is a different way to build, and it's a different attention to details, especially when you're starting to look at multi-level type structures. And you did touch on high performance buildings, but I think really when you start looking at the skill set of those modular providers, things such as just overall quality control, building envelopes and so forth, require a higher level of QA and your QA program to oversee that, especially when you're working with a general contractor that has to put the building together, or if you're vertically integrated, there's that handoff point between what happens in the factory and what happens on site. And I think that's often overlooked amongst manufacturers, is that what we see is that the industry has been fairly fragmented in that modular manufacturers have often just sold their product out the door and literally hands off after that, and it's up to someone else to put it together. And we see that as a downfall. And I think you're starting to see the industry starting to evolve in that the responsibility of the manufacturer doesn't just end at, you know, that warehouse door and a truck picks it up. There's that constant integration all the way through design development that's required on making sure that scope of work is seamless, so that everyone around the table, from a collaboration standpoint, everyone knows their role and who is handling what, so that when the building gets put together, there's no gaps missing. And I think that's been one of the areas that I've seen over the last, especially the last 5 years, where some companies and some clients have done a very good job of filling those gaps in scope, and others haven't. And I truly believe that the modular industry as a whole hasn't done a very good job of really diving into scope of work and making sure that when they're looking at a project, that it's the entire project. Sometimes we often see it as, I'm only responsible for this piece of the pie, and that's it. And that skill set of the manufacturers is to make sure that someone on that manufacturing team understands what happens between the site integration and the factory integration. So.
Yeah. And, you know, some of the comments that have come from that I've heard over the years is, you know, for instance, there are some traditional construction approaches that tend to migrate into a modular project, you know, inappropriately, right? Or they, we just hold on to those vestiges because that's the way we do it, whether it's a contract or a scope of work. And it's usually that traditional mindset brought into a modular project that makes the modular project go south in many ways, right? And because it's our default, you know, other things around that. What are some specifics with regards to traditional things you've seen in projects that have made modular projects go awry? What that kind of thinking or behavior, if you would?
Yeah, for sure. I would say, you know, again, it's comes down to, I often say it's the skill set of the manufacturer in a lot of ways. It's that knowledge base of that manufacturer that often dictates whether they're playing in the right lane, shall we say, you know, that they're not taking off more than they can chew. And so what ends up happening that we've seen is that the projects that go really well are the ones that are best suited for that particular company. And so if you have a particular skill set in building multifamily or building, for example, affordable housing, then great. But once a lot of companies have deviated from that, understanding, for example, hospitality is different than multifamily, for example. And hospitality has, you know, they have design requirements and, you know, supply chain that you have to meet a brand standard, for example. And so sometimes manufacturers don't have this understanding of what is that brand standard. So trying to understand, you know, the nuances in different sectors is critically important for a lot of manufacturers in that they're playing to their strengths. And what we've seen a lot of cases, and we're no different when we were at Metric as well, we really picked our sectors and we tried to make sure that anything outside of those lanes, those swim lanes that we tried to play in, we would often kill those jobs because we knew we weren't suited for building a particular type of building. And so I would say that is definitely a lesson learned, is that, you know, stick to what you're good at is what we always said. So there's also qualifying, you know, I often mention that, you know, it's also qualifying your client as well as qualifying the project. And we often spent a lot of time making sure that the clients we were dealing with understood the modular process and could keep up with the modular process. Equally as important as, was this building properly designed for modular? So
Mhm.
we often put equal weighting on those two aspects because we all know that we've often dealt with clients that sometimes we wish we never had, and so sometimes it's again picking your client and picking your project are often two equally weighted um, things that we paid a lot of attention to.
Craig, based on the kind of teams that you discussed and also the comfort in, like you said, the lanes of work, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure. You guys delivered the modules for the project that we toured in Seattle, right? And that was a unique project in the sense that you were working with an architect who had modular experience and a developer that was very pro modular. And for example, in that project, one thing I was surprised to see, happy to see, was appropriately sized mods, for example, or some mods that aren't just as big as they possibly can be. And that seemed to have come out of some logistics, some of them most of them seem to have to do with the urban site and the layout of the project. So I guess I'm interested because, there's the manufacturer and what they can do and what you're comfortable with doing as a manufacturer, but then that can sometimes limit you in terms of market, right? The market, and that means that you're not feeding you don't have a pipeline of projects. And that was an interesting moment where, at least for us, for Ryan and myself, it was very exciting to see a pseudo vertically integrated project that didn't require all the parties to control. There wasn't a single party controlling the entire process. And yet we saw some of the characteristics of vertical integration that we see in larger modular companies. So I guess I'm just wondering, was that project, for example, for Metric, or projects like that, were those projects where Metric was like, hey, this is going to be a value for us to fill in our gaps? Or was it reluctant, or was it, how conscious was Metric going into a project like that said, hey, this is going to expand our knowledge set, or hey, we're just trying to do this because we need to work, honestly?
Yeah, no, it was definitely conscious. I mean, that project, the Cubic Othello project there in Seattle, was it was our first micro apartment project, but it was a project that fit our stream of business in that it was a multifamily residential multi-story project that we had already done a number of multi-story projects. The fact that the module sizes were smaller, those ones there, we shipped that across the line from the Canada side to the US side without really too much issue. They were actually longer boxes, and then we cut them, and exactly. We call them saw boxes, and craned up the individual suites. But the one thing on that project, and a lot of Canadian companies can't necessarily offer construction services to act as a GC down in the US. We, similar to Metric and similar to a lot of Canadian companies, we don't have US general contracting license. So in that case there, we've just provided supervision during the installation. That was the way for us to fill in the gaps during installation. That, again, we didn't want to feel that we were just handing over the modules and letting someone else put them together without any oversight from the manufacturer. And so we were able to offer up, some of our project management services all the way through the installation period and right over to literally, final commissioning as well. And so that was something that I think manufacturers can learn from, is that, it's one of those things that, again, don't look at the project as just ending as it comes out the back door, making sure that you're responsible for care and attention all the way through, so that the customer, and in this case, the developer, has a positive construction experience. And so that they want to come back and do modular again, use the lessons learned that they had on that project, and get better and better every time they do a modular project. I think that was one of the qualifying questions that we often ask some of our clients, and I really encourage a lot of modular companies to do this, is try to understand the client and where modular fits into their overall business platform. We've seen too many projects where
the value that they're looking for.
Exactly. And too many projects have been done where there's just a one-off project. The client gets disillusioned with modular and never wants to do another project again. And
Right, and that developer became a big I mean, that developer who had no interest in modular necessarily, who had an interest in selling housing, became a big advocate for modular all of a sudden, which means, here's, Metric hypothetically not having to go out and get more work because now there's someone, it's another way of seeing that kind of the old dealer mentality. The dealer's going to take care of it, and we're going to make it's a different animal even in the marketing side, right? And so having that positive experience means not just giving them a good box; it means working with them to get a good housing out of it. Yeah, that was a fascinating.
Right. Yeah, and that particular owner, that was their second multi-story project, and they were trying to perfect it and get better and better, and that's all part of their, value proposition, that they're, turning over projects faster than traditional construction, and really that's what a lot of developers should be looking for, is that, okay, I'm going to learn a lot on my first one, and I'm going to make mistakes on my first one. And, I would even say that probably make a few mistakes on our second one, and so, but at the end of the day, it's that comfort level with what modular can do, and digging in and making sure that, okay, I see where the benefits lie with modular construction. How do I get better and better at it? And how can I deliver my housing faster, less risk? And, those are all the elements of, why we're all talking about modular. And so,
Craig, could you talk a little bit about contracts and specifically how you have dealt with, we're all sort of at the mercy of using a lot of these standard form contracts that were built around traditional delivery. So, how does modular deal with that? And, what are some tactics maybe you used in the past, Metric, to deal with scopes of work and dealing with the contractual obligations?
Yeah, for sure. No, it's an important point, and there's no sort of one size fits all for modular and a modular contract. Up here in Canada, we've been using a variety of different contracts here. We've been using construction management contracts here in Canada, as well as design build contracts. And what ends up happening is you end up adding supplementary conditions to each of these contracts to cover off the items that aren't addressed from a traditional construction contract. We were often starting to more and more use the construction management contract because what it allowed for was that design development fee, essentially, during that stage where you go from schematic design of a project all the way through to construction drawings, and at which point you're drilling down and coming up with a firm dollar value for your scope of work, at which point you can then enter into a fixed price contract with the owner for your scope of work. And so what we would often do is we would often start off with owners and provide a gross maximum price for the project, for example, at a rough order of magnitude price. And if that number was within their budget, then we would work through the design development stage to refine that construction budget. Again, there was a lot of pre-qualification required up front that they felt comfortable with us. But at the end of the day, we always knew where the goal sticks were to making sure that we always hit that budget for the project. And we kept refining it in working with, for example, a GC. Maybe there was the site elements. And so there was a lot of collaboration around the table so that, 4 months, 6 months down the road, we could enter into a firm contract and start manufacturing. That actually proved to be a fairly seamless approach for us. And that's where we were heading with most of our contracts. So.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. So you have your traditional contract, and then you layer on that. You've got to layer on that some supplemental conditions to be able to define those scopes of work clearly. Yeah, especially we found, and you could talk to any of this, that a lot of those scope gaps happen in the on-site assembly and installation, right? Where it's like, oh wait, is that the modular manufacturer? Is that the setter? Or is that the GC?
People
Who's
just
going to?
ignore them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Up front, I mean.
yeah, and so I want to be clear for our listeners. We found, and I'm sure this has come up many times, especially in beginning projects, that when there are cost overruns related to modular construction, they almost entirely can be attributed to, well, we'll talk about schedule in a moment, which is another issue, but they can almost entirely be, when you're talking about materials, they're mostly dealing with those scope gaps of who handles what in the delivery of material to the job site and putting together of that material. And what we found is something very common phrase in construction, but especially modular construction, which is scope creep. That we found the team saying, oh, we'll do that on the job site. Oh, we'll do that on the job site. And all of a sudden, it's like, why are you doing modular? Because you've just moved everything to the job site, and you're not gaining any value from it anymore. Yeah, I don't know if you want to speak to that at all about those scope creeps that happen in modular. But,
yeah, sure. No, happy to. I think, one of the areas that we always talk to our clients about was, we always tried to do what was best for the project in terms of, fit and finish. So if there was, areas of scope that maybe us as a manufacturer, maybe we didn't either have the skill set, or we thought that the end product would be better delivered on site. All of that was incorporated up front in the discussions. And I can't stress it enough that, this is probably one area that, I'm sure we were going to talk about today. And it's, the sort of that traditional construction methodology of having an owner and an architect and, barreling on down the road, going through schematic design, then starting to get into construction drawings. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute here, you're going to try and, incorporate a modular provider now? Well, that never works. And so, again, having everyone around the table early, so you have your owner, your architect, your modular provider, your GC, and then obviously a lot of your consultants all around the table early on. And really you're starting to talk about scope almost from the get-go about how is this building going to be delivered, understanding the aspects of, what can the manufacturer feel comfortable delivering on? Because the last thing you want to do is have a manufacturer starting to deliver on items that they've never done before. Mm-hmm. And that's where often manufacturers get into trouble. And so talking about scope around the table early on, so that when you build out this design development phase, everyone is on the same page and everyone's beating to the same drum, that everyone understands their role in the project. And I think that has always worked out well for us. We've rarely had projects go sideways from a scope creep standpoint for those projects that, where we didn't have all those people around the table. And so that's a key driver. I can't say that enough about any modular project, making sure all those voices are around the table early. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah. I think we have a question about scheduling, and just thinking about that workflow. So we just talked about cost. Modular has sold, the Modular Building Institute, which we love, we're both very involved in, and a lot of the research. who Ivan and I have done research, many others have done research, companies have done research demonstrating the value of reduced schedule, reduced number of days as a result of modular. That's been proven, and I think we can claim that as an industry. But when a modular project goes south on schedule, it sure, it makes the news, right? It's like headline news on Construction Dive or anywhere else. Modular project is 90 days, 120 days behind schedule, whatever it is. And so maybe you could talk about what does go wrong in modular projects with regards to schedule, and
Sure.
how can teams overcome that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's maybe just start at the very beginning. I think during that design development phase is, I think it also, when you're bringing that team around the table, I would highly suggest is that with a lot of clients or architects on their first modular project, try and bring an experienced team to the table on their first, multi-story project. I've seen a lot of cases where the owner's new to modular, architect's new to modular, so are the consultants, and maybe you've got the manufacturer and maybe a GC that has a little bit of modular experience. That's typically not enough modular experience around the table for that project to go well. And so often for the first project, we'll bring I hate to say it, but we'll bring the A team to the first project for that owner, so that they really see the benefit of modular and how it goes together. So when we talk about schedule, that design development phase is also crucial to really putting together the overall project schedule and the scope of work with all the parties around the table. It's everything from, the supply chain aspects of the type of materials chosen in the factory. Where are you getting materials from? Is there room for alternatives and alternates in the various finishes? Because sometimes that can also mess with the manufacturer in that, typically we're looking at 8 to 10 weeks, 12 weeks for a lot of long lead items in the factory. All of a sudden, a carpet die lot that has to get custom made is all of a sudden 14 weeks, and that can play havoc with your schedule. And so being open to alternates at the manufacturing stage can be crucial. The other thing too, of course, is the double streaming of activities. So while you're in the manufacturing plant, hopefully your contractor's on site doing foundation work or podium work. And so that's where, you talk about the time savings. That's the greatest time saving right there. That double streaming of activities will typically save 3 months or 5 months off your schedule just due to the double streaming of construction activities. And so when we start looking at different locations and timing based on weather, so we live in the Pacific Northwest, and rain and sometimes snow up here in Canada can play havoc. If we miss a window on a construction schedule, all of a sudden you could be delayed 6 months just because of snow and access to the site and things like that, especially in more sort of harder climates or more remote climates. So that's an area there you got to pay attention to. And lastly, I often say that water is the enemy of modular. Mm-hmm. And so how many times have we seen water penetration while the boxes are being set and not enough attention being paid to water ingress during the construction set? Looking at the weather report, making sure that there is a water mitigation plan and on the project from the date that first box is set all the way through to buttoning up and drying in the building. You better have a water mitigation plan, working with the manufacturer as well as the GC on site in how the lap and seal of those individual boxes gets done. If you're mid-floor on a project and all of a sudden it starts raining, better have that plan in place and act on the plan. So Brian, I think your point there about schedule, that is probably the number one risk on modular projects is water ingress during the construction set. I've seen it too many times where all of a sudden remediation has to be done, which brings in, the M word for mold and things like that. And now you're having to dry out the building and that never goes well. It really doesn't. So.
Spoken like a true British Columbian. That's good. Yeah.
Pacific Northwest rains a lot. I'll tell you that. Yeah, absolutely.
No, and that was what was so valuable about seeing the Felix Othello, which was a real kind of gold star project in the sense that you could really feel when we got to see it right as it was completing setting. But those decisions that you made early on made you, it seemed like it made you able to not only follow the schedule, but also react when things were, if there were surprises. So for example, in that project, or is that a project you can use? Are there examples where you can think of where early vertical integration or early decisions helped both either keep you on schedule or helped you deal with surprises that would otherwise cause, a delay that would cause a rain day that would cause, is there some specific examples, even from that project? How much of that was a result of pre-scheduling and things going smoothly, or how much was pre-scheduling a way of also being able to deal with surprises that often happen that we can't get rid of, even when we move some things to the factory, right?
For sure. And yeah, I mean, I don't know that, the Cubics Othello project versus some other projects. I think one of the things that, especially when, your schedules are compressed and you've got a defined delivery date. And we had that on a number of projects where we had defined delivery dates that couldn't move. For example, I know we did a 5-story dormitory project up here in Vancouver. And guess what? The students are moving in on September the 2nd. Well, that's a date that you can't be late on, and right. So otherwise you'll have, 200 plus students trying to find, couch surfing somewhere, and their parents are going to be kind of upset. So that type of project, we made sure that talking to the permitting authority was number one, because that's an often area of delay. Talking to them up front about how fast they could process their permits. And so, in the US, for example, if you've got a state approval process and a municipal process or a city process, you better be talking to them early on about how long they're going to take to process each of these ones, because that in itself is one of the number one risks to your overall schedule. The other one too that we often found was utilities providers. So whether that be your electrical service provider, with us up here in BC, we have Hydro, which is our utility provider on the electrical side. It is typically somewhere between 2 to 3 months for them to even process an application, let alone get in the ground and bring a new service into that site. So you're talking 8 months sometimes plus to get that in. So when you start looking at the project, there's all these other players, ancillary players around the outskirts that you better be touching on and talking to, because those all have schedule impact. And so again, it comes down to, what is your role as the manufacturer? Do you have an experienced project manager who knows all of these particular aspects of the project? Because that is definitely a gap of knowledge when we look at some of the modular manufacturers out there.
Craig, want to thank you for coming on ModX Voices. In the interest of time, we have to close out. As a summary, a lot of the things you talked about today, even though some of them were technical, like water, which is a big issue in modular, what you have boiled them down to, in my mind, is about stakeholder engagement, communication, and that integration process early on, all the way through to the delivery of the project. So whether it's permitting, establishing contracts, supplemental conditions, scopes of work, all of that needs to be understood well up front, and that critical role that the team plays in doing so. I think that's the takeaway lesson. Thank you for joining us, and really appreciate your insights about your experiences, and we really hope to partner as ModX. Where can folks find you, Craig, if they're trying to get a hold of Craig Mitchell?
Yeah, you can reach me right now. Just ping me at mitchell.modular@gmail.com, or you can always find me on LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn's a great platform, and you can always look for my updates there as well.
Great. Craig Mitchell, years of experience, joined ModX today. See you next time, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.